Hey, John Morris here with howtomakemywebsite.com, and in this video we're going to talk about displaying data from the database using PHP. Now, one thing I want to be clear on is to keep my courses focused. I focus them on one thing at a time. So Web Design 101 was focused on essentially themes, creating a template, creating a kind of theme for your site and a way to put your site together and construct it that was easy to use. And essentially what that is theming. So in this course we're talking about forms. So displaying data probably isn't necessarily a part of learning how to create a form. However, I also didn't want to leave you hanging as far as, okay, yeah, it's great, I know how to create a form and I can put data into a database, but at some point I'm going to have to retrieve that. So I didn't want to leave you hanging as far as that goes. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to cover some basic, basic way or ways that you can retrieve data from the database, from your database. So it'll allow you to retrieve all of that form data. And I think when you see what we cover in here, it'll kind of give you the basis so that you can kind of get real creative in it. So I'm not necessarily going to cover a whole bunch of advanced stuff as far as displaying data in this video. Down the line I may do a course where I cover more in depth and go into greater detail and show you advanced methods for retrieving and manipulating data. But here I just want to give you the basics so that you can go in and have a solid foundation for retrieving that data. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. So you'll notice here I'm on a page, and I've actually gone ahead and created a page that displays some data that I've put into a database. So if we head on over here to our database, you can see that we have two tables. One's the users table and one's the users to table. Now, if you're not ever going to display your data that's in your database on a website, then you really don't need to learn the PHP to do it, right? A lot of times you may be in a situation where someone just wants to collect data into the database, and then they want to just be able to download it and use it as, say, a spreadsheet or something along those lines. So again, you don't need to display it on a web page to be able to do that. Once your data is stored in a database here, you can actually come down here, and there's actually two ways you can do this. If you have a table selected, and we have this users table selected, you can come down here and hit this export button, and that will export just that table. And then of course you could go through each table and export it. Or if you want to do the entire database, you select the database and go to the export option here, and then you can select which tables, or you can select all the tables. And then what I typically recommend is just to export it as a CSV. Okay, and the big thing that you're going to want to take a look at here is this fields terminated by. Okay, so in here we have it terminated by a semicolon. Now we could put in a comma, we could really put in any character where we want. We'll leave that as a semicolon. Okay, and then you may, if you want to have like a header row that has the actual names of the fields at the top, you would select this, which put field names in the first row. And then at that point you could go ahead and hit go, and you'll see this creates a CSV file. Okay, and this is CSV files can be opened in spreadsheet programs like Excel or OpenOffice, things like that. So you can save that file. And then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to bring that back up. I'm just going to double click and open it. It's going to open in OpenOffice, and you'll notice here we have separated by, and it defaults to comma. But up here we had fields terminated by semicolon. So we'd actually, if you look down here, you'll notice that our data doesn't look, it doesn't work. It's not going to work like that. So what we want to do is uncheck comma, and we want to check semicolon. And now you'll see our data changes to something that looks more like a spreadsheet. Now we go ahead and hit OK. And I'll drag this over here. And you can see that now we have our data into a spreadsheet. We've got table 1 and then we've got table 2. Okay, so that's how it will download that data to a CSV file. Then of course, if you wanted to add this to another database, then you could just come over here to import and import that data back up. And that's actually how you create a database backup, is you actually back up that data into a CSV file. There's other ways that you can do it, but that's typically the main way that people back up their databases. They back it up to a CSV file every day or every week, and then if something happens to the database, they can create a new database and just import all of that data right back into the database. So that's one way of creating backups, which is something that you should consider. All right, so that's one way that you can get your data out of a MySQL database. Of course, if you want to display it on the web, then that's not really going to work. So the rest of this video will cover how to actually go in using PHP and grab that information and display it on the web. So again, we'll go back to our database and we'll go back to our users table, and you'll notice again we've got 2 records in here, one for someone named John Morris and one for someone named Joe Snuffy. Okay, so if we head over here to our view, you can see that we have Joe Snuffy and you can see that we have John Morris both in here, and we have their information, their name, their email, their bio, and their interest. Okay, and then of course we have our user 2 table, and if we come over to our database here, go to users 2 table, you can see this information in here, and you can see that that matches the information we have in here. So, and if you look up here, you'll see that this is our view.php file. So the question is, how do we do that? How do we display that information? Well, here is the source code for that view.php file. And as you can see, it's actually really simple. So first off, again, we require our config file and our functions file so we can have access to our database credentials and the functions that we have in that functions.php file. And if you'll notice, right off the top, we use the exact same function to connect to and select our database that we used in our process file, exactly right here. And so that's the value of creating this functions file, is now you see we're using it in multiple places and we're not having to rewrite code. We can just call the function whenever we need it. Okay, so we've called that function, that selects our database, and it connects to our host and selects our database. Now, from there, all we have to do, if you notice, remember in the process file, we ultimately just created some MySQL statements, and we passed those, or we executed those. It's really the same thing in the view.php file, except it's just different MySQL statements. So you notice we have the SQL equals, so we store it as a variable, and we have select, and that's how you select the data from the database. So this star means all from users, which is the table. So select what you want to select from what table you want to select it from. So if we go back to our database here, we know that we have these fields across the top here. So when we're doing our select, we're actually referring to the fields we want to select. So if we wanted to type these out, let's say we didn't want all the data from there, we just wanted to select data, so we could select, we just type out the fields that we want separated by commas. So ID, name, email, bio, interest. Okay, and that would only select that data then, or those fields from the database. Okay, so you can determine what you want to select. For our purposes, we're just going to go with all. And then again, here's where you specify the users table. You notice I have users specified here, and then down below we have users 2. So again, that's just the name of the table. It's really that simple. Okay, so that's a basic MySQL query that allows you to get data. And then we take that and we store it into a variable on our MySQL query, and this references this variable. So that actually runs our query and stores it into this variable. We do a check to make sure the query runs successfully, and if it doesn't, we return an error, just like before. In fact, that's the exact same code from before. And then we come down here, and I've done some stuff to echo out the users table here. That's really not, doesn't have anything to do with the MySQL. And we come to this function, MySQL fetch array, and then we reference our variable where we stored our query, okay, or the results of our query. Now, this is important because if you don't use this MySQL fetch array, what actually gets returned from MySQL on this query here is what's called a MySQL resource. Okay, and it's just a special resource that MySQL generates, but it can't be directly manipulated by PHP. Okay, so you have to use some more PHP code to get it to a point where you can manipulate it. And this MySQL fetch array is one of the ways that you do that. What that actually does is it will select the data, the array, it will create an array of data from the first record in the database. Okay, so based off of the query, that MySQL will return a resource that has this information in it, but again, not editable or being able to be manipulated by PHP. Okay, so whatever your query was, it will return a resource based off that. What this fetch array does is it turns that resource into an array of data that then can be used by PHP. So if I come here and I do, and this is, there's two functions that you're going to want to learn when you start working with databases and arrays. So one is the print R, and if I try and do a print R directly on the results, okay, so notice this MySQL fetch array is below this print R. So when we're calling results, we're calling this directly. Okay, so if we do that and we come over here and we refresh, you'll notice I get a resource ID number 5. That's referencing the MySQL resource that was created from the query we sent. Okay, so again, that shows that we can't directly manipulate the data. We have to use this MySQL fetch array. So now if we come down below here and we put this under this MySQL fetch array and we refresh, looks like I probably have a syntax error. Oh yes, because notice this is result equals and I did results, which is still referencing this initial one. So if we change that to result, we come back over here and we refresh. Now you can see we have the array. Okay, so it pulled the array and it gives us essentially the direct array that shows us what's stored in that resource. Okay, and then we can use that then to start building our display. So you'll notice we have ID equals 3, timestamp equals timestamp, IP equals IP, users, form ID, redirect to, name, email, and so on. So that gives us, this print R kind of gives us a look at what's actually was returned by that query, and then we can kind of start to use that to build our display here. Now, if you know the fields that are in the database, maybe this print R isn't all that helpful because you already know what fields you're going to need. But if you don't know, and you have an array where you don't necessarily know what is being returned, you can use this print R to look at it and start to get an idea of what's actually being returned from that query, and then use that to then again start manipulating and using your data. Okay. Now I said there was two. The other one is what's called a variable dump. So variable dump. Okay. And we come back over here and we refresh, and you'll notice it gives us a little bit different look at the same information. So again, it's an array, and then what it does is you'll notice we have our ID, and it gives us some more information about it. It says it's a string, and this is the value. String, this is the value. Now all of these are pretty much going to be strings, okay, but there may be a case where it's something different, and then this will allow you to actually see that. So that's another way that you can look at the data that's in there. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and leave that. Now we've created our query, we've got our resource back, we've turned our resource into an array that we can actually manipulate. Now, what I've done here is created what's called a while loop. Okay, so what happens with MySQL fetch array is not only does it return the array, but it will also return false when it runs out of data. So again, it's returning an array for each record that's in our database. Okay, so each record is turned into an array. Now, when it runs out of records, then instead of returning the array, it returns false. So what we can do with that then is we can use that to create a while loop. So while result equals MySQL fetch array results, okay, go ahead and do this stuff, which is all the stuff that we've put inside here. So this will continue to echo out data, or to do whatever we tell it to do in here, until it reaches the end of the records and returns false. So it allows us to create a while loop that can echo out, or that can create all our data from each one of our records until we run out of data. Okay, so again, this is a really, really easy way to make our data available to us. So now, once we've done that and we've created this while loop, and again, you notice we have the opening and closing curly brackets here, then we can do something inside of here to do something with the data. So all I'm doing is, you'll notice I'm echoing out a bunch of stuff. So the first line is just a div tag. Okay, so it's just like we did in Web Design 101, where we just wrote this out, except since we're inside of PHP, then we actually have to echo it. Now, one thing that you might find useful, instead of always echoing stuff out, is you can actually close the PHP tags like this, and we could go ahead and instead of echoing out, we could just write it straight just like this, okay? And we don't need to echo it out. And then when we want to go dip back into PHP, we just start PHP tags again, just like that, okay? And if we come back over to our view here, you notice it doesn't change, right? And that's a good thing, because we changed our code, but we still get the same result. And so you could do it either way. You can echo all this stuff out, or you can just close the PHP tag, write out your HTML that you need, and then start again. And in fact, if we wanted to take that further, we could come down here and instead of echoing this out like this, what we could do is we could come in here, and this will probably look familiar to you from the Web Design 101 course, PHP echo just the PHP part of it, okay? Just like that, okay? And then we'll open this back up, make sure we got all our syntax, and come back up here, and you notice again nothing changed, and that's good because we changed our code, but we still get the same result. And so what that shows you is you can either do it this way or you can do it this way. Okay, so those are two ways that you can echo out data using PHP. This is probably a little easier in terms of just actually writing the code, because it keeps it to about the minimum amount of code that you have to write, but this is probably a lot easier in terms of actually keeping things separated and knowing what does what. So I actually prefer to do it this way. If I'm doing larger projects that have a lot of HTML in it, prefer to do it this way. But if I'm just doing something small, I'll probably just do it this way. Either way, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so that's how you display out data. I'm going to go ahead so we don't get all confused here and can just turn this back into the way we had it. Okay, so let's double check to make sure we went back far enough. All right, everything's displaying fine. Okay, so then, so as you notice, it's just PHP, and all we're doing is we're echoing out some data. So what are we echoing out? Well, the PHP part of this is what's called a named or associative array. And what that is you notice that these are the names of our fields, okay? And when the array gets created using this MySQL fetch array, it turns it into key value pairs, which is something we've talked about before, okay? The key becomes the name of the field, ID, timestamp. We come down here, form ID, redirect to, name. Those are all the keys, okay? And then the value becomes whatever value was submitted. So this is the key, and then the value is 3, okay? Our key is timestamp. Our value is this big old number. Our key is IP. Our value is 0 in this case. Our key is form ID. Our value is users, okay? And if we come back to our database over here, you'll notice we have our key is ID, our value is 1. Our key is timestamp, our value is this. Our key is IP, our value is this. Okay, so it's just a way of storing this data in PHP that can then be accessed. So when we want to reference it, then what we do is, you'll notice we stored our array as this result variable. Okay, so when we want to then actually echo out the data, we reference this this variable which has an array stored in it, and then we just simply say which key we want to echo out. So in this case it's the name, and if we come back over to our form, it echoes out then the value of that key. So we tell it what key we want, and then it echoes out the value of that key. And this is the syntax for that right there. Okay, so that's the syntax you use for a named or associative array. Now, you can also store it as an object, and then the syntax becomes different, but the idea is pretty much the same. It's going to be the variable or the object that it gets stored, the data or the array gets stored into, and then you again echo it out using the key. Okay, so it's the same basic idea either way, it's just a little bit different way of doing it, and it changes the syntax. But again, here for what we've created here, we've got our variable where we stored our array, and then we just say what key out of that we want. So we name, email, bio, interest. If we go back, we've got name, email, bio, interest. And so that's how we echo out data from the database. So if we come back up here, let's get rid of this and save this. We'll refresh, and now you see we have our data just how we had it to start with. Okay, and we've got a little record. And of course, you could set this up to look any way that you want. Okay, so you can design the HTML to look any way that you want, and then again just use this to echo out the data where you want it to display. So most of what you're seeing here visually is from HTML and the CSS. It's not actually PHP. PHP is only providing these small tidbits of data, which are the values that are stored in our database. So you can see how PHP, HTML, and CSS come together to make a website. And if you look at systems like, I'll use the example WordPress because I use WordPress quite a bit. I believe I mentioned the Web Design 101 course, this site itself is WordPress powered. So WordPress is really just a really fancy way of doing what we've done here. If you go to the WordPress right page, if you've ever used WordPress, it's just a big form, and you fill out that form and you hit submit just like we do on our form, and that data gets stored in a database just like it was with our form, and then we use certain PHP code to pull that data back out and display it. So it's really just a big form and uses all of these same ideas to create it. It's just been very, very heavily developed. You know, it has a lot of features that have been developed, and so it's really, really fancy. But at its core, it's just a form, and it just displays data. So you have the basic understanding of exactly how to do that. So now a couple things that I want to show you is I do want to show you some things, because a lot of times you may not always want to just display all of the data. You may want to display certain tidbits of data. So we talked about how we can change this to the specific fields if we only want specific fields, but what if we only want specific records? So for example, what if we don't want to show all of the users? What if we only want to show specific ones? So let's come over here. Let's actually go to our form. And we'll create a new user. And we'll call him Mr. CSS. Mr. CSS at click.com. I love me some CSS. Interested in CSS? Yes. And we'll submit that. And let's see which one it got submitted to. Yes, perfect. Okay, so here's our Mr. CSS in here now. If we come back over here to our view and we refresh, you'll see that now down here we have see more butts, IP freely, and Mr. CSS now is there. Okay, so let's go back to our database here, and I'm going to update a record. So if you want to update a record, it's easy. You can come in here and let's update IP freely. You just click edit, and we want to change his interest to CSS. We change it to CSS and we hit go. Alright, now you can see his interest is CSS as well. If we come back over here and refresh, you can see now it changed to CSS. So what if we just want to list users who are interested in CSS? We don't want to list them all, just the ones that are interested in CSS. So we come back over here, we select all, right? Because we want all the fields, we just want to choose a different record. So what we add is we want to select all from the users table still, where, and we do interest equals CSS. So when you use the where statement, it's where and the field name that you want to base base it off of, and the specific value. So where interest equals CSS. So only users who now have an interest field with CSS are going to be pulled. So if we go to our view, it didn't do anything. So that must mean, oh, because I used the wrong table. So you notice that we no longer have John Morris on here. We have just Joe Snuffy because his interest is CSS. Okay, so what we need to do is I need to come over here and I need to change this from here. And we'll get rid of this up here to this one down here, because this is the one that we're actually looking at. And we'll change this to users 2. Alright, now we should have it. And you'll notice now we only have some people who have the interest of CSS down here. Okay, and so that's a way that you can get select data from the database based off of a value, a specific value that has been entered. Okay, so that value could be, well, it could be name, it could be email, but it could also be age, it could be gender, it could be interest, it could be any of the fields that you set up. So it allows you to go through data and pick very specific things and sort your data in very specific ways. So that's something that you'll definitely want to know. Another one that you might want to know is what's called limit. So you can actually limit the amount of records that are pulled. So we'll put limit 1. And we'll come back over to our site here. And you'll notice when we refresh, now it's changed to just 1 record. So we can limit the amount of records that are pulled. Okay, so that's another one. We can also do order by, and then we choose the field that we want to order it by. So let's go name. Okay, and we save that. And actually we need to not just specify the field, but we need to specify, for example, ascending or descending. So let's do ascending. And if we come on over here to our file here again, or page, and we refresh, you'll notice it doesn't do anything, and that's actually because these are already in ascending order. But if we come back and we change it to descending, and we refresh, you'll notice that now Mr. CSS is on top and iFreely is on bottom. So you can come in and you can order the data using MySQL as well. So those are some different things that you can do with MySQL and PHP to retrieve data and do a little bit of manipulation with it as well. Retrieve certain data. And of course, you don't have to just echo it out either. You can retrieve the data and then you can use PHP to manipulate it in further ways before echoing it out, or maybe storing it back in the database, or whatever you want to do with it, really. So again, I wanted to keep this simple. I didn't want to get too overbearing with it because this really isn't a course on displaying data, but that gives you a basic idea of how to go in and get data, whether you want to display it on a website or you just want to save it as a spreadsheet that you can use locally on your computer. So hopefully that was helpful for you, and I'll talk to you in the next course.